Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching the Weaviate Podcast. I'm super excited to welcome Aleksa Gordic. Aleksa is one of the most well-known AI, I don't want to say influencers because kind of how the term has evolved. Now, I mean, like here are 10 ways ChatGPT can make you $1 million. But, Aleksa, I like to think of this cohort of, I guess myself, Aleksa, Yannick, Tim, and Latita. There was this time where we were making deep learning paper summary videos on YouTube, and it felt like we were kind of the cohort doing this, and it was a really fun kind of time in the evolution of my career. And so always been like aware of what Aleksa's doing, and recently his story with joining DeepMind from that and then leaving DeepMind to start Ortus. This whole thing is so inspiring. I love how you have these YouTube videos where hey, I'm in Japan and I've just got out of Y Combinator and I'm here hacking all night. I love the storytelling of it. It's so much fun. So before going any further, Aleksa, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thanks a lot for the beautiful introduction. And yeah, please don't call me an influencer. It definitely has a negative connotation in my mind as well.
Yeah, well, I do. I do want to give you some credit into the technical chops that you have quickly on this YouTube thing. So playing this game with you and Yannick, and we were in this race to summarize a paper, try to get as much attention for this summary as you can to build the YouTube channel and all this. And I think a couple of things that you did that really stood out to me as watching what you were doing across the fence and competing with you as well, seeing what can I steal from this guy?
I never considered it a competition, to be honest. I think the space was big enough, like it's a global scene, and like there were only a couple of us, so I really never considered it a competition. And I'm also very bullish on Peter Thiel's competition is for losers. So in that, I don't know. Just a comment.
Yeah. I agree with that super strongly. I think a lot of things that markets are underserved in competition. I don't think of it as only one of us can win, but even with vector databases, I think of it as what are these other people doing? And competition, I think, is a big force that shows you these ideas, and it would be foolish to just not even look at the other people doing the thing. Right? But two things I want to really give you credit for is first, I remember when you started diving into the graph neural network stuff, you did some really impressive paper summaries, and to kind of read a couple off them, the neural sheath diffusion one, as well. Oh, sorry, my thing.
That one was very hard, and that was not in the early days. Like in the first batch of my graph ML videos, it was more like the popular ones, like the graph attention network from Petr Veličović, graph convolutional networks from Thomas Kipf, a couple of those, I guess, with higher number of citations. And then this one came, I think, way after that first wave of the initial series. But yeah, that one was super tough. And if you ask me now, the details about that paper, I haven't done it in a while, so it would be very hard to recall a lot of details. But I did understand it back then.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it was such an impressive. I mean, because graph neural networks, this kind of manifold learning and where you're processing meshes, it's such a complex. So I think it's a really impressive thing. And kind of another, and also, sorry, I'm noticing that I'm trying out a new camera. So for our listeners, I usually nod along a lot when I'm listening to people speak, and this camera is following my head. So I'm going to try not to do that to keep this camera in place. But another thing you did was, I remember you did this explanation of Gina AI. You had done this video, I think it was a half-hour video where you just went through the entire code base. And for the time, because most of us in this cohort, we're just summarizing papers, and I think you showed this kind of dynamic of I understand a code base as well as how to read these research papers. Can you talk me through the evolution in your career when just that decision, when it was today I'm going to walk through the Gina code base?
I don't remember exactly how that came to be, but I knew I really wanted something a bit more interesting, something novel that's not just papers, also just to give myself a little bit of break and find some joy in some other types of videos. And so that one, I know the Gina AI folks actually reached out to me and asked whether I could do something like that. And I actually wanted, I don't know whether that was my first video, I don't remember, but I know that later I had very, very deep dives, hour and a half, 2 hours long of Whisper code base. And I don't even remember all of the ones I kind of covered. But it is, as you said, it's very complementary. I realized that early on in my ML career that if I after I read the paper, if I check out the code, sometimes a single equation creates me like much more like denser mental model of what's going on in the paper than just reading the whole thing and like being confused oftentimes. So I knew that's a great way for me to learn, and also I wanted to see whether other people are going to enjoy that, because like I was literally stepping through the code like line by line by line, explaining every single variable. It was also, I guess, even for beginners they could probably follow, because I was explaining even basic Python stuff, not just like hardcore ML stuff. But yeah, don't exactly remember why I made that first one, but I'm happy I did.
Yeah, well, super cool. So I think all of that, just paying a quick tribute to your YouTube career, which that's how I first came to know you, and I thought all that was just so great. And so
Thanks a lot.
then coming into DeepMind, take me through like the early day, your maybe initial expectation. I mean, DeepMind is like Stanford. I don't know. Open. It's like it's DeepMind. It's the biggest thing in the world. So like, what were your initial thoughts and how did that go?
You mean why did I choose DeepMind, or what were my initial, like, how did the preps look like, or what in particular are you curious about?
I'm really curious about kind of mentally, like, okay, so I think, like this decision to, I don't know what you're, in addition to when you were doing these YouTube videos, what you were maybe additionally doing, or if that was the only thing you were doing, but that kind of evolution of like, now I'm in DeepMind. Did you feel like you just got drafted into the NBA? Like,
Yeah. No, I already felt fairly comfortable, to be honest. Like, because the journey started, I guess, it was the inception, happened back in 2018. That was the first time where I attended this machine learning summer camp organized by Microsoft folks, and there were a couple of, at least one lecturer from DeepMind, and all of them were like fellow Serbians. And so back then I was like, oh my God, this is kind of those guys like AlphaGo and the whole fame, and like I really want to be there. I want to be at the forefront of where people are building exciting AI stuff. And so that's when the inception like happened, if that's how I can phrase it. And then a couple of years later, like I really started learning, like getting into much more depth, and papers were definitely instrumental to getting there, because I was doing kind of breadth first search across all of these different areas, and also kind of going in depth as much as possible, and coding stuff from scratch. And so that really helped me ground and have some decent understanding of various different subfields, and couple that with my software engineering skills and like background in electrical engineering. I was already fairly grounded, so to speak. So yeah, for like a research engineering role, you don't have to be like PhD postgrad or something like depth, and so it was, I guess, enough for me to land the job.
So I'm always really curious about how this could, like, do you have a particular niche of deep learning that you enjoy the most? Like, I know with the paper summary things, you have to kind of cover a lot, like, audio clip and then Dolly, Dino, I'm looking at your channel on the left side, but like you cover such a breadth of the topics. And I feel like you kind of have to do that to make the YouTube channel, to hit a decent audience. If you just narrow it into active learning or something like that, right? But when you got to DeepMind, was it still very breadth first, or was it, I imagine it's quite depth, like, yeah.
For me, to be honest, because in that period, many of those fields that was the first time I ever started reading papers or anything about those fields. So it was not really with audience in mind, to be honest. It was fairly selfish. I wanted to do I wanted to have a decent understanding of all of these fields, so I can create cross connections and like transfer ideas from one field to another field. And so, to get to your question, even like when the last preps for DeepMind started, I did not converge into one single field. Although at Microsoft, I was in computer vision, like by my role, because I was working on HoloLens. And so I did work more with convolutional neural networks and such things. But yeah, I wouldn't say I ever converged too much into any particular subfield. Maybe computer vision kind of is standing out a little bit.
Yeah, super interesting. So, yeah, and I'm going to ask you some questions later about the new Apple headset and HoloLens, and I'm sure you'll have an interesting perspective on that, but let's dive into it. Ortus, the decision to leave DeepMind, start Ortus. What is the compelling vision that just made you say, I have to do this? Like, I
hmm
can't live another day of not working on this.
Yeah, so for me, like even before I joined DeepMind, and not even DeepMind, like Microsoft, like I knew I want to ultimately build my own like startup. That's the same reason I dropped out of my master's study as well. Like I am not the person who operates super well under these structured environments where you have so much levels of
Hmm.
supervision above you and people telling you what to do. I love this unsupervised space, so to speak. And because of that like character of mine and the way I learn, I think the most natural thing for me was to decide, hey, I want to early on. I decided I want to build my own company, and then I was like, okay, let's first get some experience in the real world, so to speak, in the industry, and then so came Microsoft and DeepMind. So yeah, this is kind of a long way of saying this was like a very something I've been planning for a while, and and then getting back to Ortus, I guess it kind of connects a lot of my different passions. One of them is obviously the thing we spoke about a lot of times so far, and that's the YouTube career. Like I
Hmm.
really like being close to people and users. Like the B2C component is kind of attractive, and and then there is the whole multimodal space and like the interesting stuff happening with large language models and as well as like multimodal models in general. And so like understanding videos, which is what Ortus is kind of about. You ask a question and you get immediately, you're watching a video. Just for your audience, for people who probably never heard of it, you basically open up a YouTube video. Currently it's just like a small Chrome extension, and you can type in a question and ask, hey, what's going on in this video? What did they talk about? And then you get an instant reply. You get where that thing is happening in the video. You get some suggested questions, summaries. There's a bunch of details that help you basically search more efficiently of what's going on in that video content.
Hmm.
Um, and and yeah, and like one thing probably worth mentioning is that the Chrome extension is obviously not the end goal. Like I do have a bigger vision, which I will not disclose at this point of time, but I'm really enjoying the learning, and I think it's an interesting space.
Yeah, I think, and the connection you're drawing between vision and language and your unique expertise in computer vision, I really want to come back to that. But this is why I kind of, as I was designing these discussion topics, really wanted to open with kind of your YouTube background. And now we have all these new tools with obviously like Weaviate and these LLMs and stuff to build these search indexes. So first, before we dive a little more into maybe just describing the stack behind Ortus and how you produce summaries, how you build question answering systems, let's like if we could continue on your background in making paper summaries deeply. I think your channel is like nearly 50,000 subscribers, which you don't get to without obsessing over how to like do it. So how do you think like the whole content creators space is going to evolve with these new technologies?
Yeah, getting back to your subscribers mentioned, I think it's actually super easy to get 50K or more if you decide to optimize for that, and if you just like go a bit more higher level. Like for example, if the two of us were just to start covering Python, PyTorch, TensorFlow, latest trends, latest stuff in AI news, all of that is super trendy and popular, and like I know that content goes very well. I can just see by the views on my channel as well, and types of video where I describe, hey, how was my experience at Microsoft DeepMind. All of those are very popular. Yet I'm not doubling down on that just because like I also have selfish interest with my YouTube channel. I never
Mm.
wanted to be a YouTuber, and I never considered myself a YouTuber. For me, YouTube was an outlet for me to learn stuff and at the same time share with the community and build some like core community of passionate ML folks. So that's how I think about it, honestly. And then what was your
Oh, yeah.
question? Actually, I kind of went on a tangent and never came back.
Yeah, well, I think that's the right way of thinking about it, though, is building the community. It's but my question is like, so like now using Ortus, you can
hmm
basically turn the AI epiphany into a chat bot that people can. I think there are kind of two things to this. There's firstly, yeah, the chatbot and the summaries. I liked what you said on Ken G's podcast about how
hmm
long form content shouldn't be consumed sequentially. I agree. Uh, this podcast is like we're going to talk about so many different topics. It's like what's relevant to you. Just watching it sequentially probably not the best way to do it.
Exactly.
So, and then if I could just add one third thing to that is the multilingual translation part. I think there's a huge potential in that with these kind of things. So Yeah, just like how do you think the experience for content consumption is about? I think it's about to totally transform.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, like I like to think that Ortus is kind of trying to demonstrate some of those possibilities at the moment. And you also mentioned languages. Like it's so easy with powerful large language models, which because we know that the corpus that they were trained on contains in some percentages various languages. And so it's actually not that hard to add multilingual support, I would say. Although the quality would probably be like dropping in one way or another, which I can't quantify right now. But yeah, definitely super exciting time because for the first time, like video is this fairly complex medium, right? Like just from the standpoint of like the memory and the computing power it takes for you to process that. And so historically, we were not really good at understanding what's going on in the videos. Like even the transcription was not that great, right? Like until Whisper like came out, like I think people
Oh
were
yeah.
struggling even with transcription, which is just like text, and ignoring the whole visual space. And then when you go like even with like maybe with shorter videos, like 30-second or something, YouTube and other platforms could use some heuristics to analyze the visual components, but like it's nothing more than heuristics. And I think we're finally getting to the point where we'll be able to use models like maybe Flamingo, maybe like GPT-4. We're still waiting for the image feature to drop. And yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this space evolves and what we can do with like analysis of video content.
Yeah, I think like when Stanford Engineering, Chelsea Finn's lectures on multitask learning and meta learning, it's like I'm so interested in that, but then it's like or like Andy Pavlov's database course from Carnegie Mellon. It's like I love, like I'm so interested in it, but I can't just 25 hours of sitting. I don't have the attention span for it, honestly. Like it's quite hard. So yeah, can you tell me about how Ortus, like just walk me through it? I'm a user, and how what can we do to make these courses easier to digest?
Mm-hmm. So are you asking for like a brief digest of how the thing works, or just like how it looks like from the user perspective?
Yeah, I suppose just like hopefully the question's not too redundant from what we were already talking about, but just kind of like any general vision on how we can take these 25-hour courses and just, I don't know, create a more personalized experience, just build that layer on top of that that makes it easier to process it. Maybe like if I could set the stage more with how I'm thinking about it is like
Mm-hmm.
if you cut it up into clips, like you use the language models to automatically identify chapters, and then you kind of like reorganize it already to convert it instead
Mm-hmm.
of just the sequential flow. That's kind of one idea. There's also like the chatbot idea, which kind of gives you something to like have your questions answered in a pretty novel way. And I suppose that general question, and we can move on if it's
Yeah.
not if it.
No. I think. Well, like long term, like I think ideally we'll just have like a big neural network, and we'll just pass like video frames through that neural network, maybe subsampled using some saliency heuristics, not just like dummy uniform sampling or something, and then it just spits out the answer. I think unless the video is like super long, I think that these super big neural networks will be able to do that. And so I think we are currently in this maybe transitionary stage where we are doing these hybrid systems. But I actually do believe that long term we'll see more paradigm shifts. I'm not sure about that. Maybe that's kind of how I see it. It's still prohibitively expensive to do what I just said, and I definitely think that things such as external memories, one of those examples being vector databases and Weaviate, do have a place to play because ultimately we know that that's the weak point of these systems. Same as with humans, right? Like I think we shouldn't dismiss just because it's like not neural network, not biology inspired. We should definitely not like ditch those ideas. I think some of the papers, like was it neural Turing machines? There was one of the early ones from Alex Graves, if I'm not mispronouncing his name. That was one of the early like papers that really sparked my imagination for these types of hybrid systems where you're combining external memory, and then later we had retrievals like retro from DeepMind or some of those ideas. So like that's going to be a component, but like I wouldn't be surprised if we just had pure networks that could analyze the video like just in a single forward pass or something. Or yeah.
The I think kind of separating it a bit, the idea of like a vision language model that just like watches a video, that I think that's a pretty exciting idea. I know like with Flamingo, and I think there's recently a new model from Character AI that's like they're making a lot of progress in this thing, and I think that's a hard thing for people even to wrap their heads. We're already still kind of like recovering from the hangover of ChatGPT. It's already so much that it's like still, I think, wrapping our heads around what we can even do with this. Like just like I'm curious, like what you think about like, LangChain, LlamaIndex, just these kind of ideas of like taking the ChatGPT into an API and then plugging it into all this data. And it seems to me like that's still just even before the Flamingo stuff gets better and just flips everything on its head again. I feel like there's still a lot.
No, I think that's super powerful. Like we've seen the adoption of LangChain, and it's definitely democratizing like machine learning for a lot of the developers. And we are seeing more. I think in the app development space, one could even argue that like if you're a great web developer, if you're just a great software engineer, you might have like an advantage compared to ML engineers. And obviously, like later when you want to optimize for, if you want to reduce the cost, if you want to fine tune your models, if you want to do all of that, that's where the ML expertise comes into the picture. But for the initial stages, we're just trying to like roll out an MVP or something. Like being a great software engineer or web developer might be like even like a better than being an ML engineer, if that makes sense. But yeah, like all of those LangChain, LlamaIndex, Vector, like Weaviate, Pinecone, all of those systems are definitely currently with this current technology, with the levels where we are, they are being the shovels for this gold rush, and I think there's a lot of value that's gonna like be acquired by the humanity over the next couple of years. But I wouldn't bet on the in the long run. I'm not sure how this is going to roll out, to be honest. I think that we are like kind of getting into this software 1.0 mindset with some of these frameworks, which is not necessarily bad, but like we went from pure, we were just like deep learning, everything is going to be just deep learning, and then there was Gary Marcus who was like, no, it's going to be hybrid systems, and then all of a sudden it is hybrid systems, which is not super surprising. Even people who were very bullish on deep learning knew that eventually, as I said, you like for perfect memory, it's much better to have actual external memory rather than like let the network store the memory in the coefficients. So yeah, I'm going to stop here. I was rambling too much.
Well, I think you definitely mined out a ton of super interesting ideas. That was kind of one of the things about Weaviate that stuck out to me when I first saw it, is that you have this like symbolic vector search. So it's a vector search where you build an index of vector representations, but you also have symbolic traversal. And so, with filtered search. And then there's also like the neurosymbolic systems where you parse a scene to get symbolic attributes that you can then put into logic parsing. I love all those ideas, but so I think 100%. We're getting now into this like evolution of, I recently did a podcast with Charles Fry that will come out after this one. The title is going to be Full Stack Deep Learning. And, they have a course called Full Stack Deep Learning. And we really dived into like the evolution of, like the ML ops and how that's all changing now. And it's kind of like this thinking that it's like the perfect minimum viable product tool, the zero shot models, and how you can get a sense of it. But then if you do build this data engine to keep training, it offers a potential to have, that unique model behavior that gives you that unique product advantage. So are you thinking about that thing with like, and it seems like Ortus is a great example of that, where you can take YouTube videos, put it into Whisper, get the like so many zero shot models are in the middle of it, right? Then put it into a zero shot embedding model that goes to a zero shot LLM. And then you get like, here's what this thing could look like. Are you thinking about then also having that data engine and what that could then take it to?
No, 100%. And like obviously there are some like privacy issues. Currently, we don't even have Google sign-in, so there is no way for us to actually couple any personal information with the data. But like obviously, if you were to just collect the conversations, if you were to collect the likes, dislikes of like messages and like summaries, there is plenty of information there and signal we could collect to then like fine tune, improve models. fine tune them for the particular channel, although there will be, I guess, probably less. Maybe for category, for a class of podcast or something, one could probably fine tune them and get some defensibility by doing that, as opposed to just being completely like zero shot. Like zero shot is obviously the best way to do an MVP. And now the problem is a lot of these closed APIs such as OpenAI, like they're paying, you have to pay premium price for fine tuning. So I think for like OpenAI it's 6x for like if you fine tune the model. So that's not economically really like feasible for many startups. And that's where we can maybe get into the whole Mosaic ML and all these exciting startups as well who are training these systems to allow you to have more control, do stuff like constraint sampling guidance from Microsoft, fine tune the model without having to have the 6x the price, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how I'm thinking about this space. It's very exciting, super dynamic.
Yeah, the Mosaic, when they announced that 30 billion parameter open source model, and then, seeing the infrastructure they built around the training cloud, because I read the blog post where they're saying basically it's between $700 and $800 to do a billion tokens of fine tuning on your instruction tuning. And so, I imagine, I don't know how many a billion tokens is. I don't have a great sense of how many that is, but I guess I would have to guess that like my YouTube channel, like the Weaviate YouTube channel transcripts are under that. I'm guessing maybe from all the transcripts and all the tokens you've been processing.
Yeah, that's a good question. I know that for training they were like around 1 trillion, right? At least for the 7B model, I know they were around 1 trillion. For fine tuning, I don't know on top of my head how much they use, but I did saw that it's sub $1,000 in price. So probably like I think even more than just Weaviate. Weaviate probably doesn't have that. You guys don't have that many videos yet.
Yeah, we're working on that.
But you're working on it, yeah.
Let's make this a long conversation. But yeah,
producing the data.
Yeah. But yeah, it makes me think like, having a fine-tuned checkpoint from MPT for each of these YouTube videos built into Ortus would be maybe that's an idea for how this chatbot gets even more powerful in this kind of system. Like, because I have to think that if you fine-tune the MPT 30 billion checkpoint on, Chelsea Finn's lectures of the multitask and meta learning course, I have to think that LLM performs better than the zero shot OpenAI LLM.
Are you sure? That's the part where I'm like really not sure, because if you take a look at the leaderboard from Hugging Face, what's the name, the Open LLM leaderboard or something, I think the best model currently there is Llama 65B and Falcon 40B, and those are so much better, at least across those couple of benchmarks that they're using for testing there, than the MPT 30B. And so there is a gap there. And there is additional gap between the biggest Llama and what OpenAI is offering through GPT-4 especially, and so I don't know, like there is this gap which open source models are kind of closing, but then OpenAI is running away, and then one would have to test and fine tune and see how much actually you get, how closer you get to what OpenAI is doing out of the box, and then is it worth it in the sense, what if they come out with it like GPT-5, which is not going to happen that soon, but like I don't know, you know what I mean? It's ultimately a trade-off. You do have to spend those $700 for fine-tuning for a channel or set of channels, and then keep on doing that as the new episodes are coming out as well, and hope that there is no zero-shot model that can just outperform you. Because ultimately that's what we're doing, right? Like it's not unimaginable that if you had like a general enough system that you don't really have, especially for these like videos, it's not that complex. It's not like you're talking nuclear physics or something. Like, so in that sense, maybe you don't need to even fine tune them if you have powerful enough general model. I don't know, just a guess.
Yeah, no, that's a great insight. I've heard that argument before as well. It's not worth the investment for fine tuning because the next generation of the zero shot model just makes all that money and data collection effort just totally not worth it at all.
It's a race.
And that's actually what brings my inspiration into thinking that fine tuning embedding models is quite a powerful thing to do, because I find it unlikely that without saying OpenAI, Cohere, or a particular company, just like I find it unlikely that the big zero shot model off the shelf is going to be able to just do better at your model at embeddings particularly. So yeah, like have you thought about training embedding models with all the stuff you're doing, like, with maybe like the Huberman transcripts, like, because I remember when you first did the Huberman transcripts, you annotated as ML Ops series, and that made me think that maybe you were thinking in that kind of headspace.
Let me think. Like I'm trying to, like, I think currently the bottleneck for my system is probably has less to do with the quality of, if I like give a certain paragraph and I'm looking for neighboring similar paragraphs. I think that Weaviate in combination with some of these models is doing a fairly decent job. I think there are probably easier things to attack, at least when it comes to these types of applications, than like tuning a embedding model. That's my thinking. For example, the chunking logic, like where do you, like, if you just chunk the sentence in the middle, like, and you kind of break down the semantics of that whole sentence, that's probably going to hurt you more than the fact that you maybe are not using the best possible embedding model in the world. And so because of all of that, if you were to just sort the bottlenecks, I'm not sure this one will be on top of the list. Although you probably know more than me. I haven't been following the research. I don't know, like, the leaderboard. What are the best ones? I know that Ada 002 from OpenAI is very good, and they were the best one. That was the best model when it came out, like 5 months ago or something. I don't remember, but like I'm not sure how the space evolved. Maybe you can tell me a bit more.
Yeah, well, I'd recommend. There's a paper called "Benchmarking Commercial Embedding APIs." It's Professor Jimmy Lin. I don't know the exact title, but yeah. So the data sets are like beer. Beer is like, I think it's like 14 open data sets, like financial questions, nutrition facts, MS Marco, and then there's Miracle, which is like multilingual, same kind of concept. So they're definitely. I think even with the state of LLMs, the benchmarking and saying OpenAI has defeated everyone. Like Cohere, like whoever's defeated everyone, there's not really a great sense of that yet, I don't think, even in embeddings. So and embeddings would be a tough one to do as well, because to build the embedding benchmarks, you're talking about a crazy data collection effort, like annotating the query relevance for a document, saying no, it's only relevant to these these documents, and so on. So it's like Trek, if people are interested in learning more about how people annotate these data sets. And yeah, all that is really interesting. But I want to the text chunking idea. This is definitely that's something we see all the time. It's one of the most common, I think, first steps. Do you see any, like, what do you think about this idea where you use an LLM to parse a document and say, here's a split for a chunk, and like you give it some kind of prompt about, like, hey, you're splitting this, you're splitting up this document to preserve semantics. Please, like, give us this special token when you want to split it. Do you think that idea is worth maybe the cost of all those LLM inferences for?
That's an interesting question. I to be honest, I never thought about it, because the expense and the simple heuristics I'm using seem to be like doing a decent job. I guess that's similar in a way to the thing I mentioned before with the saliency. When you were trying to chunk the videos, I extract certain frames that you want to ultimately feed to this multimodal model. So here you're kind of trying to understand where you want to chunk these so that you can then use whatever embedding logic or whatever you want to do. I'm not sure. Do you have, like, are there any papers doing this already? Like, I haven't been following that closely.
Yeah, well, on kind of like a meta note, since I've joined Weaviate, I don't really read papers as much to get this. My information diet is really not papers as much anymore. It's more like you just like I'll have conversation with someone who's building something with Weaviate that's like about as random as you can imagine, and I have tons of calls. I have tons of calls like this, and so this is kind of where I pick up these nuggets. Is just like what people are kind of trying out there in a more of a hacking kind of sense than like something that I'm going to say, like, this paper from Stanford and MIT, they tested it as rigorously as possible, right? But I guess like another kind of cool idea to float out there about text chunking is people are thinking about like putting metadata into the chunks. So like you'd find the title and then you'd keep putting the title in there. There's maybe some stuff too with like visual document layout parsing, but I don't know if it generalizes that well to YouTube, unless you're like, I guess what you're explaining to me in this podcast that I hadn't understood about Ortus previously is that you're trying to do something with the visual aspect of YouTube as well. So
Ultimately, like my goal is to like provide this type of like insight and like extract information in all of one, instead of you having to like, historically you have to go through the thumbnails and see, oh, where was the thing that happened, and then trying to kind of, you're using a bunch of heuristics to find information. Like obviously for some type of content, for this class of content where you have more like sedentary, like people sitting down in a podcast and just like chatting like the two of us right now, probably like it's probably like the visual component does not add that much, other than maybe emotion, interpreting, like whatever, like in that sense. But most people don't care about it, right? Like you're kind of invariant to the you're just like focusing on the knowledge, and you try and ignore like the perks of each person's like behavior or whatnot. Like so I'm not sure it would add that much to these videos, but like in general, it's a no-brainer that for some maybe more action-driven videos, shorter videos, like sometimes the visual component all of a sudden becomes much more important than textual component, right? Especially when you don't have text, when you don't have voice. So I'm definitely thinking about this. And I used to work on vision language models at DeepMind. Like I was closely working with Flamingo folks, and I was actually helping bring flamingos to the real world. I can't really dig into too much details, but like I'm definitely super passionate about this space. And I was even before I joined. And maybe getting back to the initial question you had, I think that's kind of my niche. Like I found this combination of language and like imagery or videos and audio, like the multimodal space, the most exciting like research direction, at least over the next couple of years. I think it's exciting.
Yeah, I think like maybe to tell a quick story, like before I was doing deep learning, I was playing basketball, and I used to love doing like these like you try to like dunk as well as you can, and there are like trick dunks you can do. Like you could throw it off the backboard and dunk it. You could do like a windmill dunk. You could do like a 360 dunk. And so like this, and people up there, like YouTube channels called like Dunkademics and stuff like that, where people search for similar dunks. And I can like this idea of searching for similar dunks would be quite a novel idea. And so I think there's certainly like a huge thing. I guess like I'm so biased in thinking about this kind of like information heavy stuff, which then brings me back into the
and you work at Weaviate, so you're kind of definitely biased in that respect. But like there is exciting stuff to be done in the visual space. I think one company that's doing a tremendous work, although they're like Gong, you might have heard of them. They are in the sales vertical, and what they're doing is they're helping understand what your sales representatives in your company, how confident are they, like brand reputation, all of this information. They're kind of like extracting the data using AI, I guess, in the background. What like they're probably using some heuristics, and maybe since recently they started using more neural networks, if at all. But like that's one clear example where like people are using like visual component in industry to analyze and extract information from the video.
Yeah, I think I know we're touring all sorts of topics, but yeah, like CRMs, I think are like just how you process a call and all that is just, and it kind of brings me into like what I love, my like favorite project to work on, which I feel like is kind of adjacent to Ortus, is like I turn these podcasts into a data set. I have a Weaviate Podcast search on GitHub, and like I'm so excited about thinking about what can be done with these podcast transcriptions. And
I want my compensation, man. I want for the data I'm providing.
Yeah, I'll pay you in 2 GitHub stars. However, I'll transfer the currency. But yeah, there's like these 2 ideas. I had Yusheng Wu on the podcast, who's working on something called Chat Arena, which is where you like simulate conversations. Do you think there could be anything to that? I know we're talking like just totally broadly and like about whatever now.
Simulating conversations, with the idea of like generating more data, or with the idea of entertainment, or just yeah. So sounds feasible, but like why? There could be many whys.
Yeah. Right now we're calling this generative feedback loops to like broadly describe this idea of like the feedback loop is in reference to saving the generated data back into the database to then search through it in the future. And so the idea would be you simulate these conversations and then you like save the new conversations back and you blow up this data space this way. And, like, I guess the idea being that in simulating like a million conversations between like Sam Altman and David Silver, just like picking people to just chat about these topics with, that you create like this new space. And because I kind of think like, it reminds me back to like early days of training GANs where I'd be like, what kind of novel images has it produced? And so I would need to generate those images. And that, this was way before I knew about something like a vector database or I'd even thought about that kind of idea. But you would just like, it was kind of a natural intuition to try to like sample models from the GAN and then embed them and, compare the nearest neighbors from your GAN to your training set and just say like, especially like we were debugging mode collapse. Hopefully that sets the stage enough.
Yeah. Makes sense. Well, yeah, like I guess this space of conversations and language might be even much tougher, right? To find the nearest neighbor of a conversation than of a like 256 by 256 image or 1000 by 1000 whatever with GANs. They did improve. But yeah, definitely interesting like research idea, and you can definitely imagine products coming out of that direction immediately. Like I'm sure people would be willing to pay to hear, like, I don't know, historical figures like Nikola Tesla speaking with Albert Einstein, or you know what I mean? Like, so something similar in spirit to what character AI is doing, but more multi-agent, more of that. That could be one interesting product area, and the research is also interesting in and of itself.
Yeah, I guess it's like by simulating conversations, can you discover new like ideas? Kind of like maybe like another kind of thing I like a lot about is like to take these podcast transcriptions, automatically take out the chapters and maybe prompt it by saying like, Aleksa and Connor are talking about vision and language models, like retrieve from all the other podcasts and say, did they say anything unique? Is there anything like new in this conversation? Prompts like that. And then you kind of, from there, the things that are new, I don't know, like how many new ideas you discover in conversation.
Yeah, we might get depressed, man. We might get depressed. I think we're giving ourselves much more credit than it's
no, I don't.
We're just interpolating, man. We're just interpolating, even though everybody's bashing neural networks, so they're just interpolating data. And like humans, like if you think carefully enough, like you just find a snippet of information you picked up 5 years ago, and then you connected it with some snippet information you found out 2 days ago, and all of a sudden, this seems novel and interesting. But yeah. Existential.
Yeah. Yeah, but if like this kind of synthetic data, if I can, so I saw this interview with Aidan Gomez, CEO of Cohere, talking about synthetic data, and I sampled this quote out where he says, I think there's a way in which synthetic data leads to the exact opposite of model collapse, like information and knowledge discovery. Expanding a model's knowledge beyond what it was shown in its human data, that feels like the next frontier, the next unlock for another very steep increase in model performance, getting these models to be able to self-improve, to expand their knowledge by themselves without a human having to teach them that knowledge. So that's like the end of the quote I read. But I like this a lot because I think whether you're simulating conversations or you're putting them in environments to simulate, and this is kind of like a DeepMind idea, right? Like this open-endedness. I think they have these simulate. It's like this kind of synthetic data. Like I guess I think that quote maybe does a better job of explaining it than I do. But like having these conversations is like creating synthetic data, and maybe there's new ideas in there.
100%. And ultimately, if you think about it, when you're trying to solve a problem, I don't know about you, but oftentimes I do sub-vocalize. I do talk with myself. Like I do have inner characters, like communicating with each other, right? And trying to get to the conclusion, or when you're trying to debate out an idea in your head, right? You're rolling out a discussion, like a hypothetical future. How would what would be like like if you had an adversarial, or maybe a better word would be like a super smart like opponent, and like how would you reply to all their questions, and where would you like, how would you traverse that whole like tree of potential outcomes? And so like in that sense, I think this is also more fundamental than just like data or like it might be a methodology to improve the reasoning like capabilities of these systems. It's definitely super fun, super interesting.
Yeah, I think like also staying on the deep like the AlphaGo, how it did this tree search to look into the future of the moves it could make. And I don't know if you've seen this tree of thoughts paper where it's like a language model is like
I did.
yeah, like so yeah, what do you think that tree of thoughts is? I mean, to me that seems like one of the most craziest ideas I've ever heard is combining the
Yeah, definitely super exciting. It's kind of the generalization of the chain of thoughts, like just going from a linear process to a more like tree-like
Hmm.
process. In that sense, conceptually, it's not that like, well, I don't want to say big of a deal because all of these ideas in retrospect are just connecting a couple of dots. I actually wanted to try out that idea in our system in Ortus, but the
Hmm.
thing is that that's super expensive. That type of like tree like you need so many inference steps, and that's more for some offline processing of some reasoning tasks. But definitely interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the cost of inference with large language models it's so frustrating because it feels like there's so much we could do if it costs nearly nothing to just run.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's also liberating because it constrains a lot of the potential methods I could be trying, right? Like when you have the real time constraint, when you're interacting with the users, when there is a latency component in the whole picture, then you start thinking in a completely different direction. And you realize that there is not that many great ideas that focus on like low latency, real time type of like
Hmm.
applications. It's mostly you're trying to get the model to be better and then and distill it and make it faster than all of these techniques. They're more for these mathematical logical reasoning benchmarks than for like communication and stuff. I don't know.
Like yeah, like kind of like the tool use and the well, yeah, and the whole distillation, yeah, and all these clever things. I mean, it's like how exactly are they going to compress these models and get to the point where it's super cheap to run it? Like I've seen like this, like 4-bit inference is getting really good, and like the stuff that Tim Detmers does is always like you always see that tweet, and you're like, wow, that's just insane. Like I think it's like they're at like 60 billion on a single GPU, stuff like this, and it's like, but yeah. So yeah, this
Yeah.
whole kind of topic and so I think kind of I think we've done a nice like just open-ended touring of topics around Ortus. Is there anything maybe before moving on? I wanted to ask you kind of about some personal self-organization things I took away from your podcast with Kenji recently. But is there anything maybe you want to cover as well about Ortus before we kind of move on topics?
Hmm. Yeah, I encourage people to try it out. Self plug. I
Oh.
encourage people to try it out. We just added a couple of cool new features. Like we added like suggested questions for each video. Like there is like a couple of relevant suggested questions because there is this blank page syndrome. I think that's how it's called. Like that's what writers usually have, but like also when you're interacting with these systems, people don't know what to ask, right? Even though like you can
Interesting.
actually ask the agent and it can tell you what it can do, but people don't come up with that idea, and so this small UI hack, so to speak, helps, I think, a lot. We also added Jeremy Howard today. There is a bunch of new channels coming up, so I think it's
Mhm.
exciting. I'm learning a ton, and I'm learning a ton about also just the whole backend business. For example, I spent the whole day today trying to figure out the Google sign-in. Like even though that's super conceptually easy, right? It turns out it's very difficult because of versioning. Like it's a versioning hell. Like there is the manifest version
Mhm.
2 in Chrome extensions, version 3, and so
Mhm.
like a lot of documentation is just outdated, and so people don't give engineers enough credit. We like in this ML space, like we focus too much on these like interesting research ideas, but like getting shit
Yeah.
done is so much more difficult sometimes than you would like to think, even when it's conceptually super easy. Yeah, maybe that's some like a tangent I wanted to cover.
Sorry, everyone. We had a little bit of a connection crash, but so back online, the question I really wanted to ask you, and I hopefully as the connection cut out, it got out the last part of what you're saying about recently adding Jeremy Howard's YouTube channel into Ortus, and how as I've been following along with you, you've been adding all these new channels into it, and it's like a nice like continual updating of it to follow along with. And So I really wonder about this idea of like an embedding marketplace, and it's kind of like an interesting new category. I've been having conversations with a few entrepreneurs who are exploring this idea, where it's like, say you want like the almanac of Naval Ravikant, if you want like that, the OpenAI embeddings of that book, you can just kind of like grab it from this marketplace. And I think that makes a lot of sense, because then you don't have to deal with, vectorizing the thing, and that's already been done for you. Do you think about that as being some kind of aspect of Ortus as well? Maybe like you.
It sounds exciting. I never thought about it, because I guess it always looked in my mind as a very custom thing, right? Like you have a lot of hyperparameters you have to pick to do that type of embedding, like marketplace, as you called it. In the like how big are going to be the paragraphs? Like sometimes you want to have smaller ones, sometimes you want to have bigger ones. Where do you chunk? Like the chunking decisions matter. Maybe later people figure out better methods, like for example the LLM saliency method you mentioned. And then there is also the choice of the embedding model. And then we were discussing also the quality of embedding models. So what happens if you all of a sudden some much better embedding model comes out? What do? You have to reindex the whole marketplace. And so in that sense, I'm just thinking, why did maybe like a valid question would be, why didn't we ever do the same thing with other types of data sets? For example, I don't know, for ImageNet, why didn't we create a marketplace of the embedding certain layer inside of ResNet 50? That was such a common task, right? People were constantly using ResNets back in the day, and you always had to do this pre-processing to save on compute, and then you would locally deal with that data. Like, so why didn't nobody come up with that type of like marketplace for other types of models, not just for embedding ones? I guess that's a valid question. I don't know how you think about it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a perfect. I think like the way that I understand ImageNet, maybe this is a hot take, but they put a ton of effort into labeling the data set, and it's kind of like you need to like kind of apply for it with it's not just something you can download on like TensorFlow data sets. And I feel like they kind of not paywall it, but it's kind of like with and yeah, I don't know if I'm stepping on people's toes with what I'm saying, but it's kind of like with the Mimic data set. Like you have to like get this certificate from PhysioNet, and then you have to go and apply for the data set. It's not just so that's kind of my opinion of ImageNet.
Got it. Like more gatekeeping mentality. I mean, that's fairly known in academia. I don't think you're stepping on anyone's toes. I think that's a shared understanding.
Yeah. So but I think like with with these kind of YouTube transcript data sets, it's like if you open source a data set, then scientists can like you could publish a paper where you try different text chunking with some kind of metric. Like maybe you generate synthetic queries for the Jeremy Howard videos, and then that's how you kind of like measure it, and then you can like publish science and like present it in NeurIPS and ICML and stuff like that, right? And so I guess like it's kind of interesting to me, like especially like as I think about Weaviate development, it's like what kind of data set do we want to like with ANN benchmarks, it's like we make some innovation on product quantization. It's like, okay, we're going to tell you about like the SIFT vectors recall. And it's like, that's pretty academically sound, but then I worry about if it can tell the whole story. Like it compared to like the data set Ortus has, if like we could show something like some innovation in embeddings that, creates this better experience for Ortus kind of like by using these transcripts as the data set. And then also get like the academic credit of like we did this clever technique because we're geniuses. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely not in that game. Like I should have gone the PhD route, but I took a completely different direction.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. So anyway, so yeah, I think it's quite an interesting idea, and I think there's all sorts of cool things you can do with this Ortus. When I first saw your Huberman Transcripts podcast demo with the website, I thought that was such a cool demo, and I encourage everyone to check out Ortus, of course. And so, transitioning topics a bit to I think you have a lot of interesting ideas in personal organization. Obviously, you've reached the height of machine learning success in DeepMind, and you're a startup CEO, founder. You obviously need to think about this quite a lot. So one idea you mentioned in Ken's podcast was about analogs of periodization in weightlifting and how you
Hmm.
think about your information diet. And,
Hmm.
periodization, maybe you want to explain the idea.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the idea is fairly simple. When you're trying to build muscles in powerlifting, you're not going to try and increase your weights every single workout because ultimately you're going to saturate and you're probably going to hurt yourself, right? And so
Yeah.
what they have is some type of like you keep on increasing, like maybe you have a periods like so-called macrocycles of like 3 month periods, and you keep on increasing the weight. Maybe every two workouts you increase to 2.5 kilos or something, and then at the end of that period what you do is you drop by some percentage. For example, your one max rep is maybe 300 kilos, and you like your last workouts were maybe like 80% of that number, and then you drop to maybe like 60%, and then you start from there. Like you do the so-called deloading, and then you start another cycle. I basically borrowed that terminology when I was learning new subjects, because I like to treat brain as a physical thing as it is, right? Like ultimately you do have to form those synapses, and that's a biological process, and metric has to move around, and things have to be built up. And so because of that, I think it's reasonable to make these types of breaks and periods and like chunk your like kind of organize and structure learning in that way. That's how I think about it. I think it's a fairly simple analogy, and I would be surprised if nobody came up with this like already. I did pick it up myself, but like I would be surprised if nobody's already talking about it. It's a fairly obvious connection.
Well, I think of like when I was listening to you speak about it originally, I thought it was so interesting because I think kind of like in weightlifting, I think like rep ranges are the thing to think about. Like you have like a hypertrophy cycle, weightlift as well. It's like where you would do like 2 to 4 reps, 4 to 8 reps, 8 to 12, and it ends up being an entirely different workout. And so I think the
Mm-hmm.
analog here is like whether you're reading papers or if you're like hacking together on a project or if you're writing deeply or if you're say interviewing like talking to customers of your product. So these are like 4 separate tasks that.
Exactly. Different dimensions. Whereas in workout, maybe you have like a volume and intensity. Like I could be increasing the weights or I could be increasing the volume, i.e., the number of repetitions. Maybe like you definitely have more X's when you're learning. But like there is also this workout and rest. You have to sleep. You have to like nutrition has to be proper. All of that combined, I think that also translates into the learning space. You do have to sleep nicely, and like we do know that the eureka, the epiphany moments, no pun intended, like do come often when you're just chilling and like having a hot shower or taking a walk outside in nature, and yeah, I think there is a lot of cool insights you could pick up from like that other space.
Yeah, so do you think about organizing your time that because like for me honestly it's just like a chaotic mix up of those tasks. There's no order to like what is done. Like I don't have like a reading week, engineering week, talking to people week. But do you think about organizing your time in that way?
Currently, it's more on a day-to-day basis. Like again, it depends on the stage of your life. Like back then, I was trying to learn so many different topics, and I think that was the best approach for that. Currently, I still do have some structure, but it's more on a daily basis. Like I know when I have a workout. Like I just had a workout immediately before this podcast, and then like I have certain nutrition after the workout. Like I have regular sleeping hours, and like I have maybe cold shower around like 5 p.m. And so like I do have some structure, and around that structure I'm trying to put in everything else, and I do try to, if I don't have it, I feel I'm not as productive. I think it's very important to have some type of rigidity to constrain your time in one way or another, but that's what works for me.
Yeah, I think like something that's worked for me, just like little things, is like I try to have like meetings every day in like 2 time slots, like between like 11 to 1 and 4 to 6, if it allows itself to be organized that way, and then I like to have those in the calendar, and then I have like my morning session, and then I have my afternoon session, and then the pressure of being like, if I don't do my deep work before the 11 to 1, then it's lost, and so that's kind of just like a little thing that I do in addition to things like, I maybe don't do cold showers as often as I should, but Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you, again, it depends on whether I think Paul Graham had this like distinction between like the builders, the makers, and then was it the managers? I might be missing out the other group because I'm not part of the group. But like the whole point is when you're a maker and builder, you really need to have these prolonged periods of time with no interruptions. And
Hmm.
so if you do have a chance, and I likely do have that, like I can just schedule or like not have meetings at all. And usually I rarely have meetings, to be honest. I started having attending podcasts a bit more like on Fridays, but like most of my time I try and get into this flow. And for that
Mm.
flow, you do need like spans of time or like 3-4 hours to just get deeply into something. Otherwise, or even more. Otherwise, I don't feel as productive.
Yeah, I guess like yeah, I used to like it's so interesting. Like I also agree. Like for me, it's like more than 3 hours is like I'll probably like not really be. I'll probably like be on my computer, but like I'm like like after 3 hours. So that's why I kind of like to just do like 3 hours at a time and then meetings and that kind of thing. But the other kind of meta topic is I'm curious as you're building Ortus how your perspective has changed on breadth first thinking and depth first thinking. Like something like you mentioned debugging this sign in error with Google. How would you categorize that kind of task?
Yeah, well, again, I would categorize it as bread first still because it's one day, right?
Mhm.
I do a bunch of stuff. I have to take care of. I currently am a single employee, and my girlfriend is like doing the product design, and she's also helping around different other stuff. But like the technical component, I'm basically building the whole system. So that means I have to be all around the place. I have to do the whole data pipeline, the robustness of the data pipeline, the backend, the some SLA and then the front end part and thinking about UI and having user studies. I actually started having more and more user studies, and some of those, as a consequence, some of those UI decisions I made were a consequence of those user studies. And so it's fairly broad, like in that respect. Then there is the marketing component, obviously, like community outreach, all of that. So it's very all around the place. It's not focused like in the same sense as some PhD guy or somebody working at DeepMind right now on a particular like research is doing, right? Like even though on this micro, like in this, if you take a look just as a day as a time unit, then I was just doing this obsessively the whole day, like for like 6-7 hours already or something.
Fascinating. Yeah, I think my personality, and I think maybe you share this, is like that kind of. If I was doing 6 to 7 hours of thinking about, like, I have a gradient spiking error, and I'm like trying to debug it for all that time. I don't know. I don't really have the attention to do that. I need to have like a little bit of marketing, a little bit like for me, the breadth first, it kind of like keeps me having fun with it. Like if I, but yeah, so
Yeah,
yeah, all that.
yeah, I definitely can empathize with you, but like I think I can still I can pull it through. Like I think it's very important. Like oftentimes there will be issues where you are stuck with something and you have to push it through and do just single thing for days. And I think I do have that skill. It is harder. It does require like there is like a physical manifestation of pain sometimes, like just because like
Yeah.
oh my god, you're just pissed off with everything and you just but you have to push through it. And so it's a skill. I think it can be built as anything else, but probably yeah, definitely more enjoyable when you're doing like when
Mhm.
you're having this broader understanding of everything and just yeah.
Yeah, I think like in the psychology of like the most painful thing you can do, that's for sure. I think like the most painful thing is when you're solving a coding error that like when you do solve it, it's not intellectually satisfying at all. It's just like I can't believe that was the thing, right? Like,
Huh. But like I think when you're an engineer, when you're a software engineer, you learn to appreciate those moments because most of your job looks like that. And for example, here I really like Greg Brockman. At least according to what I can see, according to his tweets, he seemed to be that type of person. He's like pushing through these very painful, boring details, nitty gritty details. There was some off by one error or like some redundant copying between the GPU and the CPU host or whatnot. Like, and he, after 7 hours of digging deeply, he found the problem was like obvious in retrospect, but until you find it, right, it's like the asymmetry between verifying versus finding the solution. Very exciting.
yeah, yeah. No, yeah. There are a lot of people at Weaviate who do that better than I do, and I just respect it enormously. It looks hard, but every now and then I find myself doing problems like that. But yeah, that like just getting into the CPU profiling and all that kind of stuff is really a huge skill. One other thing you said that's really interesting that I relate to a lot in my life is my fiance also works at Weaviate, and we work together as a couple who also like talks a lot about work. And so I'm really interested to hear that like your girlfriend is doing the product design, has all that. Like my experience has been it's like just a ton of fun, and maybe we talk about work a little more often than a normal couple would, I would say, and like
100%.
yeah, but it also ends up being a nice conversation topic, I think, in your relationship.
No, I don't know how my relationship would look like if we were not like connected on this project. Like most of my time, like since I like the moment I wake up until 2 a.m., 3 a.m., I'm literally constantly working in one way or another with a couple of these breaks I mentioned, like because they are important. So like I'm not sure where I could squeeze in that additional time to keep the relationship healthy. So because of that, I'm very grateful we are actually super aligned on that front. And she and I, we are both aware of that dynamic. And yeah, I think that's exciting. Like maybe a thing that popped into my mind talking about this whole thing is if you know the guy who is the CEO of Replit, I think Amjad is his name. He's actually, I don't know if you knew this, but his wife is his co-founder.
It's awesome.
And that's super exciting. And they've now crossed they are a unicorn company now already, and they've been in the game for like 7 years, and since recently they've been just exploding. And I think I really love to hear those stories where people are not inside of the common pattern. I really like respect that, because the pattern is you want to be 2 to 3 founders, like mostly guys, not like, and then like preferably Stanford, et cetera, et cetera. Like you know what I mean? Like those like YC has this pattern matching, and you have these companies, and like there are all these expectations and statistics. And so when you hear such a outlier like succeeds, it's very like motivating as well, right? Because that means okay, now maybe we can do this. Or same with me. Like I came from like Serbia, and like this guy was like just self-studying, and then all of a sudden he's like in the best top AI like lab in the world. Like okay, maybe I can do this. And so I think those are very important for like just like hope in the world, I guess.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Aleksa, man, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I had so much fun talking about all the technical ideas as well as hearing about how you're managing your time. Ortus, such an exciting project. I'm so excited to see how it evolves. And thank you so much again.
Thanks a lot, man. I really enjoyed the conversation.